other people in the commercial industry don't think like this. This is not normal, and maybe that's not bad. Maybe that's good. You know, I've really been this sort of independent thinker for a long time, feeling like I have to fit in. Maybe I don't have to fit in. Maybe I'm all good just in who I am, and that's effective, right? If you deny this, if you're in the commercial world, and if you don't acknowledge the human component, your business will not transcend. You know, to be truly transformative and to you know, really invent evolution that is sustainable, purposeful, meaningful, you have to have an artistic perspective.
When you're just living your day-to-day, you're going to be taking in all these different inspirations. Every conversation you have, every interaction is going to be planted in the back here somewhere and shifts things ever so slightly. And then, you know, the person you are next week is going to be different to who you are now. And a year later, 5 years later, you know, you're a different beast.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is, as long as you've got a vision of what that beast is for,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, as in, you know,
I'm still trying to find it. I'm still trying to figure it. It was just more like I'm just going to cast it out there, and then and just trusting that it'll all kind of
Well, I think. I mean, I know that you're like big on the kind of purpose idea.
Yeah,
but I think the purpose thing is, it's like, you know, how does it contribute, right? Like, I think figuring out, like, for me, when I sort of got to this point where it was like, you know, it's not about what I'm about. It's about what I'm able to contribute.
It's that you're spot on, man. And when I was like last night, when I was caught up with George Hedden, that was the founder of Bechervaise. And he was talking about how he's trying to figure out his purpose and his why. He's like, this new part is evolution in all his processes and everything in life. Real creative guy, and he's stuck on at that point of like, what does the purpose look like? And what I've figured out for me, and I think that this goes for everyone, that the purpose will always have to come down to serving something bigger. Always. I think fundamentally if you keep whittling it down, it'll get to that point. And up until you realize that, it's gonna feel almost soulless, right? Like, it's not gonna be enough. So you just have to find what that bigger purpose is, that bigger than you kind of thing.
I mean, I think that for me as a creative was a kind of like a fundamental breakthrough. Like, I remember, like, leading up to, before I had something deeper, like a deeper belief, I guess, like, about myself. I was just following the line. You know, and I loved it. I loved following the line, because I was sort of a bit like, well, there's all these other creatives that have kind of been before, and look at how rich and inspiring what they've contributed has been. And so I was just kind of following the line of, this is what creative people do. You know, so I was outputting, and like, I love outputting. Like, there's something magic in kind of being in the flow of that. But for me, like, the big breakthrough that I had for myself, which is quite deep and personal, it was in like 2015, and I had an art show in Paris, and I got to this point where I remember saying to, like, my creative partner, the guy I was working with at the time, I was like, I need a philosophy, you know, and he was like, what for? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I was like, I don't know what it's for, but I know that if I don't do it, something is always going to feel like it's yearning for the true understanding of, like, what this is about.
Something to latch onto.
Something to latch onto, something like it was sort of like it was a real kind of esoteric moment in my life. And I remember like I remember flying to Paris, starting to write something on the plane, and like I'd read enough by that point from other creatives that talked about philosophy and kind of like had this, sense of who they were and why they were like doing what they were doing. And like I didn't really know how to start, so I just started. And I remember I started writing just metaphorically, and I started writing about like this idea of like how does a stone roll down a hill, right? So I unpacked that.
How did you even get to that point?
I just kind of thought about nature and went, well, how does like nature move, right? And then I went, well, how does a stone roll down the hill? And I was kind of like, the stone rolls down the hill by like gathering speed and momentum, and it kind of does away with everything that's on it. It's sort of in motion. And what is that? Like that was literally my starting point. It was just a really raw sort of thought about what is movement, right? Like, yeah, because I was kind of going, what is creativity? That was really what I was digging into, because I've always loved creativity. I've always admired creatives. And so I was like, what is this thing I've always loved and admired? If I can crack that, then that's a starting point, right? And so that's what led me to this curiosity of like understanding. And I just started writing. And out of that, I wrote this piece, and like it's somewhere on my hard drive, but it was like the genesis of this idea that I have around like creative evolution. And it sparked my own take on what creativity like is.
So what is it?
So the stone, has to move, right? Because if the stone stays still, it gathers moss, and it has no control, right? So it's like everything grows on it, and it's reactive to its environment, right? So this is where the thought started. And so I was kind of like, if the stone is still and everything's on it, and engulfing it, then that there's no creativity in it. There's only the kind of static nature of continuum, right? And so I was like, well, how is the stone to be a creative stone, right? Well, it has to be kicked. It has to be, something has to set it off. Yeah, there has to be a spark, right? So the stone might somehow create that spark, or something might happen, and then the stone reacts to that and it moves, right? And when the stone moves, it's off. It's all a bit kind of like wacky logic, but I went, the stone has to have this spark, it has to move, and then how does it become in motion? It has to roll, and as it's rolling down the hill, everything comes off it. All of the things that it allowed to attach to it, they all start to kind of relinquish, and as it moves, it gains momentum and speed, and more and more intent, because it's sort of like rolling at this kind of like rate of knots, and there's power in that. And so at some point it might hit something and it kind of flies forward and reacts with something else.
Yeah.
And that's creativity. And I went, okay, so creativity it needs a spark, right? But it needs friction.
So it has to be, so using that analogy, the spark, or the thing that sets it off, is an external force then?
Yeah, like I was like, there has to be some happening to get
outside of
there has to be something that creates a spark.
Yeah.
Right. So it might be that the stone has been there for so long that, you know, I don't know, like something sort of quakes and it moves.
The ground beneath it.
The ground beneath it shakes.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much kind of force in its static nature that, you know, something erupts, right? You know, the old volcano sort of
there's analogies and metaphors in absolutely everything. So I like it how you manage to take a small little, almost insignificant part of nature.
Yeah.
And then really just dissect and analyze that and see how you can apply it.
Yep, absolutely. Like yeah.
So you're the stone.
Yeah.
Everyone's a stone.
Yeah, everyone's a stone. And we're in nature, and it's what we do within that context. And you know, you can have these destructive stones, if you like, or you can have these
boulders.
Yeah, sure. You know, like people kind of gather so much force that they forget that they're in nature, that they forget that they're part of a bigger ecosystem.
Yeah.
Or you can, you know, be this kind of rolling stone that just wants to be in motion, and you know, he's happy kind of like moving along, contributing and being part of like that ecosystem, but also being in motion and, you know, kind of like helping create that movement. And so for me, that analogy, that writing that piece, working my way through it, thinking about it deeply, you know, like I was in London and then I was in Paris, and I like chatted to my cousin who's a mathematician. And I kind of talked him through this piece of thinking, and he was like, "Oh, you could apply that to a business, or you could apply that to a workplace, or like, you know, he's kind of like super logic in the way that he thinks, and so he went, you just need a bit of a different angle on it. And I was like, okay, because I was like, I felt like a little bit like I was like ecstatic that I'd kind of discovered my understanding of creativity, right? Because I was like going, this is a bit of a breakthrough for me. It's creativity's a natural idea. It's not egoic, etc. And then he kind of like brought this other angle, which was like, you know, then you could nurture that. Like you could, how do you create sustainability, right, with your concept? And I'm like, oh, this is really interesting, right? Because it's sort of like, you know, I guess we've always understood this idea of like, you know, chaos theory, and like in music, it's like punk. And, you know, in culture, it's like the artists are, you know, they're outsiders, and they you know, they don't practice in the norm. And so you'd liken that to this idea of friction, right? But then how does it grow, and how does it kind of like inform others? And so then this second idea of nurture came into this concept from my cousin, and he was like, you know, once you've kind of broken through and you're in motion, then you nurture this new way. And so my philosophy out of that became friction and nurture, and that was like my foundational thought piece, which just became the basis of my understanding around creative evolution.
And if you take that analogy and you think about this rolling stone and it's gathering momentum, and it will eventually, or even like say an avalanche, right?
Yeah.
Snowballing kind of effect, like literally and metaphorically, it gathers size and weight and momentum. It's like almost like an unstoppable force at this point. And it's also changing the landscape that it's in.
Yeah.
Right. And then when it finally has pulled everything in, and like the trail that it's leaving behind, it's where it was is no longer the same anymore.
It's not the same.
It's not the same. So I think that could be, that's the friction. when you mentioned that the last time we spoke, and it got me thinking like that. I don't think that they're necessarily mutually exclusive or independent.
No.
I think that they're in constant.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have to have one for the other. And I think that's the thing. And what I found with creativity is, not to your extent, but I've thought about and have written on what I think of creativity and how it plays into everything. And, you know, you bring it all the way down to a molecular level and how...
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I guess the goal of everything is to try to find stability, even at the molecular level.
Yeah.
And it has to expel this energy, this radioactive energy to be stable. But in the process of doing that, it causes neighboring molecules to become unstable. So there's this chain reaction of things constantly shifting and changing. So every time when we come up with a creative idea, whether it be a piece of art or innovation, the whole, it came from, it was inspired by the antithesis of whatever else, right?
Yes, totally.
It's an opposing force.
Yeah.
And then what happens then is that it creates its own situation that's going to call for more opposing forces. And it's this constant friction.
Yeah.
And then once you have that, it needs to be nurtured.
Yep.
To be able to be better understood what it is.
Yeah.
And then as it's being nurtured, there's going to be other people or other things around it. They're going to be like, I disagree.
Yeah.
And then, you know.
Because it's, you know, it's disrupting the understanding of what is.
Yeah, because we're aiming for that stability.
Yeah.
We always want things to be stable, but it's a constant flux. This is a balancing act. Always. It's like when you got your foot on the accelerator, right? It's a particular point where you're either accelerating or decelerating. There's no real, you're stationary, right? So there's just like the concept of like entropy, that there is a constant expelling of energy to stay like a duck, right? To be able to be staying constant, it has to be moving.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So at a minimum, something's happening.
Absolutely. Like, I think, you know, you think of the idea of an engine, it's like pistons that are in constant, you know, flux. You know, you think about great artists like Bruce Lee talking about this idea of like, you know, be like water, this constant movement, but there's also this kind of like this management of movement. Which is, you know, what you're talking about in the kind of like creating stability around it, or for me, it's around kind of nurturing it. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's interesting for me is, you know, you kind of like move forward in life and you apply these kind of creative principles, and you are still always met by the opposing force. To creativity, which is the conservative protection of the status quo in some way. So I found that really interesting along the way, and like, you know, I'm quite level in the way I kind of approach myself these days, but it doesn't make the ideas level. You know, the ideas can feel overwhelming at times, I think, for people that haven't thought into themselves around, you know, why have I ended up here? Why have I ended up thinking the way of, you know?
Yeah, and it's largely out of your control, man.
Yeah.
You know, like you're born in the family that you're born in. They impose values that they inherited.
Yeah.
You're in this particular environment. The people that you knew at an early age, you didn't get to pick.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's luck of the draw who you end up with.
Yeah.
And luck of the draw, the person that you grow up to be as well. You know, like foundationally.
Yeah.
You know, you have these set of values that you probably didn't, you never really got to pick.
Yeah.
And I think that when it gets to a point when you have the ability to to really consider it, then whatever it is that you're going to be considering, if it's going to be in contrast to what you currently believe, you can only see it through the lens of what you currently believe as well. So there's, we all have we have this one world, but yet there's 8 billion different versions of it.
Completely. And the first kind of organization that you're born into is a family organization, right? And the first culture you're born into is a family culture. And I think for an artist, if you are an artist within yourself, there's no way you're going to be able to deny that instinctual nature, and you're only ever going to be able to to break through, right? Because to be an artist is to suffer the truth in a way, right? It's it's the continual search for truth, because within yourself you're going, there's something in me that it has to contribute, it has to follow this line like I talked about at the start, right? The line of creatives before us, right? It's all a lineage, right? Creatives through time are all creating the next breakthrough for, the next kind of period of us, to come after, right? That's why we admire the people that we admire, the Picassos or, the Bruce Lees or, even, the Dalai Lamas of the world. They're all artists, right? Because they have this calling, this instinct in them. And then to be an artist, to be born an artist, it's sort of there's no way you're going to be able to escape that. The only thing you can escape is the shackles of the ideas that have been kind of opposed upon you.
Would you not say that everyone has the capacity to be an artist?
I think they absolutely do. Yeah. I think that the human nature is inherently an artistic nature. But I think the other thing is that we're sort of I'm getting philosophic again, but it's sort of we're of the animal race, so animals kind of move in herds, right? And so we do follow, and we fear drives that that mentality of following, because to be the black sheep, and again it's all an analogy, right? Is to expose yourself. And there's vulnerability in that. The way I view it is, and I agree that we all have the capacity and innately part of our human nature to. I think that even without realizing it, they're made up of a combination of all these different processes that are constantly being firing. And it would be a time, or at every moment, whatever thought you're having is the one and only time that thought is ever existed, ever. Not even just in you, but ever. And it's really just comes down to how you want to act on that, and I think that with creativity is creativity has a lot to do with the action of it as well. Because the ideas are constantly fleeting, right? They're in and out, right? But if there's nothing being done about it, then it was just a spark, just a glimmer. Totally.
So
I think those things come and go at, a rate of knots. Every day. Fuck, it would really be interesting just to be able to measure, get a gauging of the energy expenditure, that's being fired at any one time globally. And just there's so many ideas, so much being thought and considered, then it really just comes down to then it makes you wonder how things move in the way they move. How did we decide to
have, how do we land at something as simple as a newspaper, right? And you can pair it all the way back that we created language.
Yeah.
Or even before.
Yeah, I love all of this stuff.
Oh, dude. So.
This is the real creativity. It's sort of like, how are we sitting in these shapes and, all of that. Like that's the super interesting
just
stuff
the evolution of things. And it's just mind-boggling to think that when there are so many things happening at any one time, so many ideas, so we have, to use a book, right? Like the concept of a book has been around for centuries.
Yeah.
But before that was, we had to develop letterpress. We had to develop letters. We had to be able to bring in and compose shapes of the letters and attach it with sounds. And then we had to speak it enough that the ideas from here is coming out here into your ears, into your brain, and then you're forming a picture of it.
Yeah.
And this goes all the way back to when they were just grunting.
Yeah.
And somehow we landed with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that boggles my mind, that through everything that's happened, that this is just the way that it's turned out. And it was probably never going to turn out any other way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the curiosity factor that artists and creative people grow up with. Like, I can only talk to my own experience, but like even sort of 11 and 12 years old, I had this kind of like this philosophic take on like life, and it seems a bit kind of like odd and misunderstood, I think, especially when you're younger. It's like I never really accepted the idea of almost anything, right?
What do you mean?
Yeah, I know. Like, oh my God. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to get under the hood of what it was for. And then through that understanding, I could accept it, right?
Yeah.
So my thing was, even from an early age, before I found this idea of like purpose and kind of like understanding yourself and kind of understanding your motivation and your intent, I didn't believe in the idea of doing things for the sake of doing them or doing things because that's how they're done. Because in a way, part of me felt like it was really damaging. I was sort of like, what is this concept around essentially like priming people to fit in a certain way? And, for young people, right, again, I talk about, around the idea of like family, what are these, where have these values come from, etc. And so, like for me, like again, even from an early age, I really wanted to understand, and like over the years, and going through my own process of like I said, writing my own creative philosophy, understanding my own kind of greater purpose in things. I look at the idea of family, and I think to raise children. I don't have any children yet, but you want to create space for people to understand themselves. And no one talks about that idea, right? Like, well, maybe they do these days, but family has historically always been this kind of lineage concept. So when you flip that around, you go, it's not about lineage, right? It's about creating space for individuality. You're flipping the idea on its head. And so, if you were to look at great creative people, the people that we admire, they've found themselves, they're able to like find their space in the world, right? And whether they had to fight for that or whether they were given space by their parents, they were able to grow into themselves and become, their own ability in life to follow their own cause and their own purpose and contribute in their own way. And that, for me, is like what being human is. So you said before, does everyone have an artist in them? Yeah, I believe they do, and I think that's why they do, because everyone has something in them that's theirs to give.
Yeah.
And that's artistic.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Liam Sadea on this podcast. He's a philosopher of creativity. You would love it. You would love a conversation with him. He's brilliant thinker.
Yeah.
And he introduced me to the concept of when you create like a child.
Yeah.
Right? Just to strip it all back.
Yeah.
Remove labels and whatever it is that you think you know, try to unknow it.
Yeah.
You know, before we attach labels, we know there's something as simple as, no, you can't do this because of this.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how about you just have a crack and discover it for yourself?
Yeah. Because
you might find something in that process of even discovering that you can't, you might discover a new way that you can.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, and with your design background, you'll know that there are a lot of like principles of design that say that this is how things should be done. But conversely, the way to get cut through is to do things the way they haven't been done, right? It's to try to be unique, but authentic in the uniqueness.
Yeah.
And so it just comes back from like whatever it is you think you know, when you do the things, unknow those things.
Yeah.
As well.
100%. Like I was never really good at following the rules of most things, I guess. So what I came to reconcile around that was I had to discover intent. So it was like when I was learning, like early days when I was like, in school or at university, I needed to discover the intent in what it was that I was learning about, and I needed to discover my affiliation to that intent. And when I did that, that's kind of like deep foundational stuff, I was able to move with it. Like I was able to excel with it, but I wasn't able to learn conventionally. Like it felt like an impossible task for me. I had early dyslexia, and I couldn't apply my mind in a way that allowed me to absorb logic for the sake of absorbing logic, right? And so the way I was able to kind of like grapple with this, because I wanted to move forward. I wanted to learn, but I had to teach myself how to learn.
Yeah, okay.
And I had to teach myself how to learn artistically. And so like these days I'm like quite a prolific reader, but when I was younger I couldn't read. I read one book, I think, through school. Like as in I attempted to read texts and whatnot, but
so did you find a way that works for you, or is it
absolutely
just having to break through barriers?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I follow this idea around intent, right? So if I see a book on a bookshelf that's tuned into exactly what I'm curious about right now, like the thing that I want to actually break through in a kind of micro learning sense, I'll buy that book and I'll obsessively force my brain to absorb the information, a bit like a computer, like sticking a cartridge in it and downloading stuff. And it's not, it defies the principles of like logic, because I'm so determined to gain that information that I commit myself to reading words on a page that otherwise would literally kind of scramble my head. So I've applied that way of learning to like my way of living, right? So I go, I have this. I have an intent. I get a curiosity, and I want to follow that curiosity, and I want to break through on it. And I love the process of like following something that I don't understand.
Mhm.
Like, and so what you were talking about before of like thinking like a child and kind of unlearning, I learn what I need to know to kind of like get another brick in the building, right? And then I go for the next brick. And so I never really rely on anything that I've done before. So I'm always going for the next brick, and I always want to be a child. Like, it's part of like, I have a kind of like a bit of a cheeky sort of sense of humor, I have a way of not taking things too seriously, and I want to keep that like always. Doesn't matter what age I get to, because I want to have the ability to kind of like look at things and feel pleasure and joy in kind of not knowing where it's going to take me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was something that my 8-year-old, Lennox, what he said, and it broke my heart. He, I asked him, it's like, have you ever thought about what life is going to be like when you're older? He's like, no.
Yeah, cool.
It's like, I don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
I'm like, not even like a teenager. You thought about high school? It's like, no, I don't like it. I don't like the idea of it.
Yeah, that's cool.
And he said that I just want to enjoy my time being a kid.
Yeah.
And it just tore me up. It's like, oh my God, dude, one day you're not going to be.
Yeah.
And it's I want to reflect back at this moment.
Yeah.
And just be like, I felt, at that moment, I felt really sorry for him to having to eventually just realize he's not a kid. And this is the thing I was going to ask you. When you said that you move around and, you go through life having this curiosity, like you want to remain like a child.
Yeah.
Isn't it strange that at some point we turn out as adults, but I don't know when that actually happened. At some point, like, and I was explaining to Lennox, like, you see me as your dad, you see me as an adult, but I can still go back into the time when I was, an 8-year-old. When I was your age, I remember being your age.
Yeah.
And then I remember being a 13-year-old. Then I remember being an 18-year-old. Then a 25-year-old. Then at some point, I'm now 40-something, and I don't know what happened, but I can still go back and be in that place. So the fact that you see me as an adult, it's like, I'm just me.
Yeah.
I don't know what to call this.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I can still go back, and I want to be able to just still do that.
Yeah.
And know what it's like to live like that.
Yeah.
Right. And like, when did we fucking just grow up?
I think so. Like, my take on this idea that you're talking about is
when you get bills.
Yeah, it's when we let life take us for a ride, and we're not taking life for a ride anymore. So I can kind of talk to this in kind of a moment in my life where I built something, like I helped to build an agency and kind of evolve an agency, and I applied my model of thinking, my philosophy, and I kind of like helped to transform them. And the process of doing that was incredibly exhilarating, because it was kind of like, again, it was like the Rolling Stone, pure creativity, right? And it had, its trials and tribulations and all the things that come with it, but it was that momentum concept. But it came to an end for me when it became big. It grew. It worked. The idea worked. And, I was on a board at the agency, and I was creative strategist, and I was managing the thing that I'd helped build, and I was part of the institution and the like status quo that I'd helped to create, and I lost my mission. I'd accomplished my mission, actually, probably. And, I was successful. like in the version of being successful that the adult esteems.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'd gotten to the point where it was taking me for a ride. I wasn't riding it. So I became an adult, and I didn't like that for myself.
Then how does your philosophy kind of tackle that? Because it just seemed like that was the inevitable step, right? You apply this philosophy, you grew something based on that, it became what it was, and you're like, holy shit. So how do you then manage that?
So you revisit your philosophy and you go, like, let's check in on this and go, what's the next layer of this thing, right? And it led me to kind of like new principles around the exponential curve, right? Like, or the infinite game. So when you endeavor to do something, step into it with this intent of it never being complete, right? And so when it becomes complete for reasons that are outside your control, then your part of the mission's over, right? And so it always has to be about you driving your vision and your mission for this infinite cause, this infinite purpose. And the process is a reward, right? And as long as you're driving that vision and mission, right, you're good. You're in the childlike state. So if the thing you're creating is in flux and in movement, you're childlike. But if it is controlling you, you're static. And for me, I learnt that after the fact. And I, to be honest, I had to go through some trials and tribulations in kind of reconciling, that certain experiences for myself and going, why did I do that? And where I got to was like, understanding myself better as a result, and now I'm doing it again. But you learn how to better understand yourself as you go, and these are, this harps back to kind of like what you were talking about before, where like one thing reacts and causes a reaction in another thing, and then it kind of swings back and kind of like informs, everything we do kind of creates this kind of sense of movement, which can inform backwards to the creator as well.
Dude, absolutely, always. Yeah. And if, because we love the metaphor.
Yeah.
Being a parent works exactly the same way.
Yeah.
That there's so much that I've learned from teaching and trying to raise my boys. So a simple one, an easy one, patience. How to distill a piece of knowledge down to something that is simple enough for a child to understand.
Yeah.
And that comes back to the whole, like, being able to understand things like a child, because you're trying to teach a child. And then when you're able to then view things in that way, it really does simplify everything.
Totally. Well, I think that's also great strategy.
Yeah.
I think creative strategy is simplification of genuine logic. Right?
And it does sound like a bit of an oxymoron, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Does it? Like, you normally think of like creative strategy as being like the most intellectual person putting together, a great big document of incredibly important information. But I think of it as the opposite. I think great creative strategy is simplifying that document of important information down to its simplest, most intentful and purposeful, cause that a child. I talk about this a little bit with other people. I said, if a 12-year-old or younger can understand this, it's good.
Yeah, yeah. And, because you love a brand as well, I had that conversation last night, and I was talking about how in the tech world, in the startup world that there's not enough of appreciation for brands and the power of brands. And one of the fallacies is because you have a brand like Apple that is easily adopted by children and seniors, right? So they have captured the whole spectrum, and it's the same functions. Everything is, the usability is identical. You slot in anyone and they can use it and they'll figure it out just like that. That they layer that in with the, not just the user experience of the products, but the brand experience when you walk into a store, just even through all the visual communication in the copy, all of it. It's all so tight, but it is so simple and it's disguised so well that you don't even know it's happening to you. And that was one of the things about like tech brands, is that they see branding as, firstly, they just see it as visual design, but they don't understand that when you distill everything down to the simplest form, it becomes invisible. It's just a felt experience and something that you can just, you get, but you don't know it's happening.
Yeah, like 100%. I at some point along the way, I think after I lived in Europe, I lived in Amsterdam for a bit and had a great time. But it was incredibly kind of like romantic. Everything about it was.
Yeah, for sure.
And one thing I found also really romantic was like, you know, obviously I had kind of like a great appreciation for art, but like even the advertising in Amsterdam was kind of geared for creative people. Like it was artistic and it was like really thoughtful and it sparked a feeling in you. So like a brand had paid for a certain concept, right? But it wasn't screaming about the brand. It was invoking this feeling within the viewer that unlocked more of themselves. And I loved that. I was just like, I couldn't stay in Amsterdam forever because, it's incredibly freezing in winter. But I love that part about Europe was there's this kind of romanticism in, the way that they love, art as kind of this intellect. Yeah. And for me, what I took out of that time, and I kind of came back with this idea, was this concept around universal ideas, right? So like ideas that make and compel and make you feel something inside yourself, right? That's undeniable. And, those ideas they're simple. You've boiled them down to something incredibly human, something incredibly meaningful, and something that is thought-provoking. It contributes to, the greater conversation, but it also unlocks conversation.
Yeah, I love that idea. Where I find it to be a challenge beyond that point, and tell me if you agree, because you've seen much of the world, is that in Europe, they'll have a good understanding of themselves, the culture. It's been around, all the individual cultures have been around for a good long while. Here in Australia, it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, sure.
There's a lot of internal friction.
Yeah.
And it's quite divisive in a lot of ways. And it's an amalgamation of different cultures. And when you bring one thing in, it may potentially contradict something that's already been here.
Yeah.
So with that being said, there's going to be some cultural biases, right? So in Europe, when they understand who they are, have a sense of identity, they know how to convey that.
Yeah.
But over here, if you were to try to just, I guess, copy paste it, I don't know. Firstly, I'd pretty damn sure it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But where I think it gets lost is that just that next layer, because there is that essence, and you're right. There is, and I'd like to get a better take on what you think this universal truths are, because I think they exist, but I think the next layer above that is when you're starting to communicate it or convey it.
Yeah.
That's where things just get washed.
Yeah, I think it's about building context, right?
Yeah.
So universal ideas are about human nature, but I think the thing is you've got to be cognizant and aware of the context in which you're unlocking this thinking. And so you've got to build a platform in which people can find themselves and move themselves forward with it. So, I love Australia, but one thing I find about Australia is it's not led by artistic thinking. It copies it. Not in the same way that somewhere like China might copy, right?
Yeah.
But it's highly influenced by the cultures, as you mentioned.
Because that's how it comes in, man. Where it is, we have immigrant backgrounds, right?
Yeah,
so we bring in those cultures, and it just goes into this melting pot.
Yeah.
It lacks.
It's an amalgamation, right? And I think the thing is, there's actually great opportunity in that, and so the way I think of it is, you have to respect where somewhere is at, right? Like you can't be somewhere and disrespect the fact that it is what it is, but you don't necessarily have to follow it. You can help lead it. So we go back to this idea we talked about before, where we go, as long as you're riding the thing rather than letting it ride you, you're in this childlike headspace. And for me, to put ideas out there and to kind of like contribute in a way that's around this kind of like universal thinking that helps people unlock more of themselves, you also, you have to cultivate the space for people to kind of like better understand themselves. So, something I've done over the years is, I've worked with different people through creativity to slowly help them kind of unlock more of their purpose, their why, their artistic instinct. And you have to create space for it. And it it's a little bit of a roller coaster ride to go on, because it means that you have to be aware of the fact that they might need time, right? They might need time to let an idea kind of sink in and to work with the principles of it within themselves. And it's got to be broad enough, universal enough, multifaceted enough that it allows for that space, which is an incredibly balancing act. It's an incredible balancing act.
How do you, when you say you help people with that, at what capacity? Is this like through mentorship?
Yeah, like, so, I guess through working with agencies, I helped them to transform, and part of doing that, and even other creative people, part of doing that is being very nuanced with each different person, because everybody thinks differently, and so you change your dial to suit the aptitude or the appetite of different people. Some people you can really let everything out and kind of share incredible vulnerability, which creates incredible creativity, whereas others are further back in their own journey. So you put out enough and you kind of like create the right space and you give it the right time, and you have to monitor it, and you have to manage yourself in that as well. Like, it's definitely something I continue to do in my own life, is like I have to constantly manage like myself in helping others and giving back to myself so that I've got enough to sustain what I need to be able to do that. But it's all through this kind of creative process of, I'm going to keep touching on this idea of staying like a child, as you talked about it before. Keeping yourself in that zone to help others become more like that, which ultimately unlocks their creativity. And for agencies and for organizations, the more creative they are, and I'm not talking about the cliche of creativity, I'm talking about them being able to think laterally and beyond their beyond their constraints. You're opening up their ability to unlock their own sense of purpose, find their vision, move themselves up the level, and be more lateral. You have to create a space for that.
Yeah, it's a tough one because not even just a space, but they might not even have the tools to know what it is that they're actually meant to be doing.
Well, you have to create the spark at the beginning. So we
Kick
go
that
back.
rock off.
We go back to the metaphor, right? You have to create the spark to get the rock to move.
Yeah.
Because the rock might not even know that it's stuck, right? So you create that spark at the beginning. You put in that little kind of force of nature. And that's your friction point.
Yeah.
And then it rolls, and then you got to help and you got to guide it in its movement.
Yeah. I think every rock has a sense that it is stuck, whether or not they know it, but they feel it.
Yeah.
There's because it does come back down to that whole everything is constantly changing always.
It's changing around the rock.
Yeah. Right? So whatever it might be, even if you're not moving with it, there is still this sense of stagnation.
Yeah.
And if you're not evolving and you're not growing, you're not absorbing, you're not moving with your environment, then you're already moved further behind.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, when we have progressed through life and we're now in our 40s. And I feel as though that one of the trappings is that the world is moving so quick now and moving kind of like, whether it be societal views, political views, whatever they may be, but we are in this little pocket here and things are shifting one way or another. So where we thought we were, had this particular view on the world, then the world changes. The view stayed the same, but the world is now different.
Totally.
So then it's like, what has actually changed? Have we just changed just by virtue of being stuck?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good definition of being stuck, I think, is like you get stuck in your ideas because your ideas serve part of yourself that defends your narrative.
Yeah.
Right?
And it doesn't fit in the world anymore, or everything else is.
Well, everything's in a state of motion, right? But you want to, for whatever reason, defend a predisposition that you might have created at a time in your life where you might have been reacting to something. I mean, we get into sort of psychological philosophy, I guess, but yeah, like for me, the thing about creativity, and this is why I've kind of drawn and painted like pretty much my whole life, is you have to constantly understand that you have the information that you have up to this point in time, and that's fine, but it's not going to serve you tomorrow or next week, and that's scary.
Yeah.
Right? That's a hellish.
And you don't think of that.
That's a hellish thought.
You're like, I've got this. That problem that I had, solved.
It's a scary thought for a lot of people, right? And so, for me, it's something you constantly have to wrestle with, because especially being a creative professional, we make everything that we create. So, like, we haven't kind of gone into a stream of logic like law or accounting, where it's about aptitude. we've had to build a system of relevance, which is about the way that we're able to contribute, beyond what is, right? That's where our value sits.
Yeah.
So to practice that, to be in practice of that, means that you have to come to terms with the idea that everything you've done up till now served the time, but it didn't serve you, right? Because what you do tomorrow is the next bit of your contribution. And so in a way, like, again, sort of getting deep into psychological philosophy, you have to learn how to relinquish ego, because the ego says it's important because I did it. It's important because it's who I am, right? And the truth of the matter is that it isn't important, right? It was valuable at the time, and you've done it, and it's a brick in the building, but the building, it's not gonna rise up without more bricks, right? It's only gonna stay at a ground level. And the thing is, if you go, all right, I'm good now, right? I know what I need to know. I'm going to set up shop. I'm going to kind of join the conservative function. You trap yourself and you become stuck. Yeah. And that's to what we talk, what we're talking about before. That's how the rock stops moving.
So there's a part where you have to be absorbing and trying to figure out and think and answer the questions that have been asked of you, but in the same breath, you have to then also relinquish that knowledge in order to be able to take more in to answer the next question.
Totally. Like the highest kind of like idea around this is like becoming a vessel, right? Like, like different artists have talked to me about this over time, but like then you kind of look at like thought leaders. If you listen to any sort of Eckhart Tolle, he talks about like being this kind of vessel in life, and it's the highest version of kind of what we're talking about. Like think of somebody like Gandhi, right? He was this vessel. He was in contribute. He contributed to the time, and he was kind of the conduit for that contribution. There's other great examples of that, but I think it's really hard because I think definitely when you're younger, ego is an enabler, it can be an enabler of creativity, right? It can be. It can help to manufacture self-importance. But I would suggest that the higher version of that is purpose, and you can relinquish your ego, through purpose, because what it allows for you is this understanding of the process I'm in is the process of contribution, and the happenings around that circumspect. They're in reaction to me going through my process. Something happened here, something happened there. Cool, but it isn't the point.
Yeah, I completely agree with the idea of all of us as being a vessel of ideas, and things are moving in the way they move. Like you were born in a time that you didn't get to pick. You didn't get to pick any of your circumstance. And for the most part, you still don't. You're reacting to it, right? And when I was saying that earlier on, you don't get to pick your value system that you were born into and your beliefs, the languages that you speak. You're the first language, at least. You don't get to pick that. It's just been taught to you.
Yeah.
So if we're constantly just absorbing everything that's happening around us, for the most part subconsciously, then the ideas that we have are a combination of all those things that we don't have control over, and to think that the idea that you have belongs to you is very egotistical. You know, it's, you know, the concept of like copyright and ownership.
Yeah.
I understand why we have those in place.
Yeah.
But if not for you executing that particular thing, then somehow that idea in a different manner, in a different shape and form, would arrive at someone else because of just the whole flow of things. It might not be in the same way, but, you know, like there's an undercurrent of things that are happening, right? Like there's a push towards this particular narrative. And then when we're being influenced by that, there's thousands and millions and billions of ideas that are getting fired across in and around that space. And it's what gets executed that gets to live on.
Yeah.
So to think that it was your idea, it's, yeah, I think it is the ego telling you that.
Yeah.
But you were just there at the time when that idea was fired.
Yeah. I think to really kind of kick into this idea of like creative sustainability, which is something I thought a lot about, like, I think before I got into my 40s, because I was like, yeah, I think I was about 39, just before I turned 40, and sort of I'd done a lot of stuff. Like I'd had a bunch of art shows.
Yeah.
Some better than others, quite conceptual, like a lot in there. You know, I'd been creating art for a good amount of time. I'd worked in agencies, you know, I'd helped to transform an agencies. I'd had, you know, these leadership positions, and I'd used my creativity abundantly, you know, and I'd kind of like been on this, you know, bit of a roller coaster, but it was, you know, in large part on my terms. And I remember I kind of like hit this point where like the circumstance had sort of put me in a spot where I was reevaluating myself, right? And I was between things. And I went, holy God, like I reflected and I went, I don't think I can keep doing that. That's immense. You know, that amount of like creativity just pumping out of you. And I thought back through the things that I'd done, and I got enveloped with this incredible fear, because I went, what if I'm finished? I was sort of like, my ego took over and it made it about me. And I said, you know, what if I've created my last idea and done my last thing, and what if it was time-based? And what's all of that? And I really wrestled with not even being able to kind of reconcile how I did it all. Like, how did I even do all of that? What was the formula? Can I do that again? Can I copy it? You know, I went, can I create that kind of art again? And, you know, it was a real kind of like reflective but sort of period where I had to work back through and reconcile my ability to have created what I'd done to that point in my life. And it did allow me to kind of go back right to very early days. And it was only in doing that, going back and understanding myself, like really digging into who are you, which is pretty, you know, it's sort of tapping back into that sort of esoteric space, but going, why are you driven by this stuff? What is this? What is your view on, you know, I know I've written a philosophy on creativity, but...
Had you written it?
I had written it by then. But I went, what started all of this off, right? And I was able to go, I was born like this. Like I can't change that. You know, I can't just because I have this great fear, like I'll never play football again. I'm sure football players go through this kind of thing.
Yeah, okay.
I had this great fear of like, I won't be able to do that again, you know, and it's all mind-based. But I went back and I went, well, it was never about doing any of it in the first place. It was never about having the show. It was never about being successful commercially. It was never about, creating any levels of sort of status in accomplishment. It was never about that. And so going back to that spot and going, it was only ever about expression, and it was only ever about me being myself. I was able to kick off again. I was able to like go, well, I love myself and that's fine. Like that's all I need. I need to know that I'm good in who I am and in why I do what I do, and I'm allowed to be myself, right? And so I went, okay, well that's something. And so I started to draw again. I slowly started to paint again, and I went traveling with my partner, and I went and looked at nature. And I just spent this time in nature with her, and that really awakened something in me, because it was like it took me back to going, this was never about anything else. It was always about me accepting myself. And nature started to kind of open me up again. And I've been drawing and painting nature for the last 2 years. And it's incredibly therapeutic for me, metaphorical, like it I've always created art, but in doing this work, I probably let go like maybe the most that I have previously. And I love that I'm able to not know what I'm going to do, and I've always loved that idea of not knowing what I'm going to do.
Just embracing it now.
Just embracing it. But I have this relaxation with my art at the moment, which is around, I'll show this when I'm ready and that kind of thing. But this is for me. It was always for me. But through times and periods, I felt I needed a validation around it. But I know that that's just not true, ultimately. So,
did you ever tussle with having to wear different hats, working on the strategic side of things, and being a visual artist, expressive? Did you ever tussle with and going back to labels, trying to then consciously or subconsciously attaching labels to it, and then struggling with knowing who you are and then what you should be doing?
Like, absolutely, and 100%. And it was a long time there where I like completely separated my two worlds, where if I was working commercially as an art director, later as a creative director, and then at some point a kind of creative strategist, I kept that distinctly opposite away from my art, which I've always done. And it's why I had this pseudonym early on, actually. I mean, originally, it's from graffiti, but then at some point it was sort of like into this street art idea. But this pseudonym was something that I relied on to stay somewhat camouflaged from like real life, like not in the same way that real gorillas go out and smash the system. Although I love that, and I've had the odd time in my life where, you know, I've kind of like let myself kind of move into that space, but then come back out of it. I went, like, I want to be creative within, you know, the system, but I want to change the system, right? So I can't be a weirdo. I can't be a weird artist, because everyone's going to go, oh, you know, what's all that other stuff that he does? You know, because they're all in boardrooms and stuff, and they're talking about big money things. And, you know, I'm like hanging out with people that are
causing mischief,
because it's more interesting than kind of following the rules. So I separated these two things for, I reckon, you know, 10 plus years. And it was fine, but I always kind of had this angst of like, well, it's like I'm two people. It's like I'm two different people. You know, on the weekend I'd go and hang out with artists who are my favorite people, if I'm, you know, being biased, because, you know, they're just so true in their intent, and the conversations are, you know, aren't wrapped up in, you know, like greater bias, right? But, you know, then I'd go and kind of like work into things where I was kind of commercial, but I never really bought into the commercial principles of thing either. So it was always this kind of like, again, and go back to this idea of like friction, right? And it wasn't until I crossed over for myself, right, and then kind of like got a way down the line where I went, other people in the commercial industry, they don't think like this. This is not normal, and maybe that's not bad.
Yeah.
Maybe that's good. And I went, you know, I've really been this sort of independent thinker for a long time, feeling like I have to fit in. Maybe I don't have to fit in. Maybe I'm all good just in who I am, and that's effective, right? And so at some point the two things started to kind of connect up. And these days I'm really aware of the value of I guess like those principles.
Yeah.
And I really go, you know, to be truly transformative and to you know, really you know, invent evolution that is sustainable, purposeful, meaningful, you have to have an artistic perspective. And if you deny this, if you're in the commercial world, if you know, operate in the world of commerce or corporate structures, and if you don't acknowledge the human component, your business will not transcend. You know, like the best companies in the world are human-centered companies. And you have to have creative leaders, you know, within those organizations. And yeah, like it makes so much sense these days. You get more context around it, and you go, you have to have empathy in understanding, and you have to have sustainability in your practice.
Yeah, when you say that, you know, when you have a foot in both camps, but you relate more to the artists, and it just straight away, like, you just got me thinking, like, what is the difference between the two? And they're obviously quite polarizing, where you have the artist that is moving towards being more vulnerable, and trying to be authentic and more expressive and genuine in their approach. Then you have on the other side, the corporate side, where I feel as though, and parlaying in both spaces as well, I feel as though that there's this overarching narrative that people play into, don't dare to question it, but instead of trying to move in the direction that artists do with being authentic in their approach, that they have to then start putting guards up to fit within that puzzle piece.
Totally.
And they don't get it because you're putting on this facade.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, like, if you're able to then doing what you do and have this a bit of a crossover instead of separating the two and embracing the uniqueness that you bring to both, and instead of having two identities, just having the one, that has to be exponential in the growth, like personal growth even.
Totally. Exponential in personal growth, exponential with people you work with.
Yeah.
If people have the aptitude and the ability to tolerate the, I guess, level of pain that it takes to be genuine, the payoff is truly infinite, right? Like if you want to scale a business, this will scale your business. If you want to break through in markets, this will let you break through.
Like, how many times have you heard when you're speaking with a client and like, oh, this is just the way it's done? It's like, fucking why? Like because you've just been told that.
And well, they're trapped and they're stuck. To go back to the metaphor from earlier, they're trapped and they're stuck in their understanding of what they're capable of, right? And to do this kind of work where you're helping organizations or brands to create impact or to be transformative. There's this kind of like there's this ability between two parties to like think about the broader contribution of what you're doing, but then also to break through, right? Because it creates breakthroughs. And to fuse all of this, creative ability and this kind of artistry into something that, keeps the wheels turning. That's where, real innovation occurs. Yeah. And you're actually breaking out of norms, right? So you're shifting categories. And it wasn't until I realized that as well, like, I was going, just because you live within a category doesn't mean you need to be the category.
Yeah, you don't have to succumb to how things are done.
You don't. And you don't have to be uncomfortable with the idea that what you bring to it might make it better and that you don't need to conform to it.
Yeah. Labels, man.
It's labels.
Yeah.
But I think all of this stuff, it takes willingness. So you have to be willing to be vulnerable and be exposed, which, means you have to face your fear.
And a lot of the times, man, it feels like a bit of a no-brainer, right? Like when you,
yeah,
and it just seems so obvious. But then it's and to use metaphors again as an example, an episode that will be coming up soon. Actually, by the time this one's out, the other one would have already been out. Spoke with Elise Marchianti. She is a visual artist, but also an ultra adventurer. She does lots of crazy shit. But she was telling a story about when she was doing highlining from like slacklining, but cliff face to cliff face, just bonkers. And I was asking, like, what was the mental process? Talk me through that. And as she was telling me, literally step by step, how she went about it, I was just hearing metaphors about how she had to, get her mind into this position of taking a first step, right? Like, how do you, before you can even take the first step, how do you even stand up?
Yeah.
And, you could just take all of this like your rock rolling down a hill, hers walking on a slack line, take that and apply it to all these other components of your life. Like, your rock needed a spark to kick itself off. For hers was just that first step. Like, how do you ready yourself for that first step? Once you get the first step, the second one is just a repetition of the first, and then so on and so forth. And it's just about staying within that mindset of one step, but it's just that first step. So to that point, using that as a metaphor for breaking molds, breaking the categories, is that there is this whole, that resistance and that fear, but just take that first step, and it's the biggest one. That 0 to 1 is always the most difficult.
It's the biggest one.
Yeah, and then once you have that, then
you get
the
momentum.
rock is rolling, and then all of a sudden that category is just completely broken apart.
Yeah, and you're changing culture after that.
And then
when you change culture, you're really into the exponential change component. You're into creating an effect that ultimately means, and
it permeates other areas, and people start thinking differently. They start behaving differently, start acting differently, and it really is. It's just that little nudge.
Yeah, definitely. But like, I think that is also a good analogy for art, right? So I think
that metaphorical blank canvas. Yeah,
right. So, like for me, I was a young kid when I just started to draw, and I would just draw my experiences that I was experiencing.
There's nothing holding you back.
There's nothing holding me back, and I was prolific in, it's all I wanted to do, and it was obsessive for me. But then ideas started to come out as well, and I produced those ideas. We created, me and this other, actually this kind of like my first, the son of my first mentor. He was a creative. He had a creative agency in Adelaide. We were friends in primary school, so we were young, and we created these characters, and we created this performance, and then out of this, performance in drama class, we created this comic book about the characters, and we created an offshoot character, and then we sold these comic books, and we had this little mini kind of entrepreneurial, creative venture going on, purely creative. Like, it was hilarious to kind of think back about it now, but it was like the creative process coming out of, like, I don't know, 8-year-olds or, very young kids, but we're both kind of creatively inclined. And like, we just did it, we just started, and we didn't know where it was going to go. And it's a really good analogy for art, I think, because putting something down and not knowing, I think the not knowing is overcoming the fear, right? So to talk to that analogy of putting one foot in front of the other, it's a lot of fear in putting that one foot down, like creating that one, kick-off movement, because it's the what if factor. What if I can't keep doing it? What if I can't make it? What if people look at me and laugh at me? And what if they don't like it, right? Like, what if they think I'm weird? And what if they don't accept me? And so art is a great metaphor for allowing your instinct and allowing your expression to walk you forward and create that continuum. And that's why I love it. Like, that's why I think art is the true zone of creativity, because artists are facing the fear of society.
Mm-hmm.
They're showing up to that fear, and they're going, I'm going to put myself out there anyway, and I'm going to put myself out there to be ridiculed and to be laughed at, but that's my job. And it takes a lot of guts to do it. And, you have conversations with these people, and they live in this self-determination, and it isn't for great financial gain. It isn't to kind of like fit. and be accepted. It's to genuinely contribute to the debate. That's where I park myself. I go, if I'm going to pick one, it's that. Yeah.
So even in your household, man, there's heaps of stuff going on constantly. Is that intentional, or is that just a byproduct of how you and Lucy have just decided that this is our philosophy, this is how we're going to do things?
Yeah, like Lucy, she's flourished, to be honest, when I met her, I knew she was kind of a free spirit. But she's really broken herself open creatively because of all the conversations that we've had over time. And she works with kids, and she's an art teacher. She works at Loretto College, and she's teaching young people about creativity. And at our place, she makes these kind of felt sculptures, which I help her with. I kind of like help her with the concepts. And yeah, she kind of prolifically makes these things, and to watch her make these things get bigger and bigger, it's been a real joy for me to see that.
Almost sculptural. You've gone from canvas to sculptures.
Yeah, totally. And it's a collaboration with her, but it brings a huge amount of joy to both of us. And yeah, we have a kind of ritual on the weekend where Saturday and Sunday morning, we talk about whatever book we're reading, and kind of we work through the ideas that are being discussed, and I guess it's a bit of a life collaboration.
Yeah. And that's just the way you channel it is into these masks, or these sculptural heads.
Yeah, these things that we create. Like it's a part of this kind of like broader sort of an narrative or analogy that I've got around kind of like unlocking your subconscious and allowing your true self to come out through what you create. But that's her version of that. And
you're the Yoda.
Well, I'm just a catalyst, right? Like, I probably suffer a little bit more because it's just sort of like, it comes with that want to never sort of rest.
And she works with kids.
Yeah.
So she's got that. She's just let go.
Yeah, she's let go. Yeah, she's always kind of been like that. She has a great kind of freedom around like who she is and who she lets other people be. And I think through having me as her partner, she said to me, I've really learnt a lot around understanding that every person is unique and that's acceptable.
Man, as much we live in a world where we like to, and I suppose it comes back down to our survival, just wanting to, be able to categorize and attach these labels and have, preconceived conceptions and perceptions of people. But when you just whittle it all down, there's obviously we're all very unique, but I think that you'll find that there's more in common than not.
Yeah.
As well, and and it's just so interesting, man. Just sitting down and talking with different people, and you're getting a different take, on the world, right? The world that you think that you see, someone else could be right next to you, and then they could just even something as simple as like, "Well, I didn't see it that way." It's like, wow, okay,
and that's okay. And I have this.
It's wonderful.
I have this philosophy, which is everyone's entitled to do what they want to do, as long as they're not hurting someone else. And I think, like as long as ideas don't create damage, they're valuable. And obviously there's kind of like fine lines in all of this sort of suggestion, but to be a free thinker, you have to have the ability to, allow people to be, you have to accept, and like I said, until it becomes harmful, I'm open-minded. I sort of like, I have a system I use within myself, which is like the 3 strike policy.
Mm-hmm.
If someone strikes out at 3, then maybe that's...
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. I know. I give them two chances, because I think people are going through stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there has to be a degree of friction, and I think that, again, not a blanket rule, because there's nuance in all of this, but I think that some things have to be harmful. If if you're going to come up with a concept or an idea that is going to challenge the status quo, however people take to it, it's up to them, right? And if you cause offense, then it's also on the person being offended to ask themselves, why are they offended by this? And it could just be outright offensive. It honestly could just be that at one extreme, but it could just be something that challenges their ideals, which should be challenged.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably triggering something in them that they haven't confronted in themselves, potentially. Like there has to be, the ability for that to occur,
And the very nature of challenging the status quo is that you will be triggering people.
Yeah.
And whether that's the intention or not, it is a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's always been a status quo, like right through history. And this is the other thing I think about a bit. Like we've got quite a few books on philosophy at home, books on art history, and like everything that we're going through now, some form of it has been experienced previously.
Oh yeah, everything's cyclical.
Yeah, so that makes some things comforting, because there's a lot of hysteria that goes on.
Yeah, with everything. It'll pass.
Right, but the thing is, things have always created hysteria. There's always been something provocative that's occurred that's been hysterical. And, if you look back through history, and if you synthesize it, and if you kind of like, be philosophical with it, you go, well, that's kind of the equivalent, like what happened back there is the equivalent to this, to the equivalent of this, etc. And so you got to create this reservoir in your mind of understanding and acceptance to go, it's not as bad as you think, and we don't know what we don't know yet. So,
and to tie it back into your whole analogy of relating things back to nature, when you look at and observe these patterns, these patterns are repeated everywhere, right? Like, we have seasonal changes, we have ebbs and flows in tides and currents, and everything moves in that way, in that same rhythmic pattern. So that, and to your point about whatever current state we are in, there is an underlying philosophy or basis behind what's perpetuating this. But there's going to be a counter swing, and it's going to swing back the other way. So we see it everywhere, like if you want to even go down to like, the golden ratio, right? You see these relative proportions. Yeah. You see these upswings, and, they kind of like maybe get more and more drastic, but it's all related, and we all have this interconnectedness to these changes, these ebbs and flows.
Yeah. Like, I think, go back to this idea around balance, right? So, it's about finding this, ability for like new ideas to, balance in, but, have the ability to like move forward as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you look back through history and great ideas, did that. Like, the wheel, when that was created, it's a balanced idea because it hit a harmony. It was something that was truly sustainable. It was a truly sustainable concept, and it created other concepts.
Yeah.
Right? It created the horse and carriage.
Yeah, just set things off in that.
Completely set things off. So while it was a completely disruptive idea, right, it also created harmony and sustainability, and then more ideas as a result. So there's an incredible thing to think about in this idea of creating this harmony in creating the new.
Harmony.
Yeah.
So what are you working on in the minute, man? What's keeping you busy?
Yeah, like I'm pretty multifaceted at the moment, which is
How you like it?
This is how I like it. Which is great. It kind of like talks to that idea of like kind of being like water. I'm not saying I'm exactly like water, but at this point, but I'm flowing pretty nicely. I'm helping to transform an agency at the moment. I'm working with different brands and helping those brands, figure out their genuine kind of like, vision, mission, purpose, their ability to create impact, ultimately like, be transformative in what they do. I'm working with people. I'm helping people with their creativity. And I'm seeing that, bear fruit, and I'm seeing them start to come up with their own philosophy of themselves, which is, incredibly gratifying because you move through periods where you see fear, and then to see these kind of breakthroughs occur.
Yeah. It's the ebbs and flows, right?
It's the ebbs and flows, but that's the payoff. You see that creativity is the catalyst, and while it causes this tension, this friction, it then kind of breaks through, and you're able to nurture these new ideas.
I mean, you've got to start with that fear. You have to have that, right?
Well, you have to go through the fear. You have to face the fear, and those that don't remain stuck, as we mentioned before. I'm painting these kind of like natural pieces, this kind of like my take on nature, and I want to have a show. I hope it's this year because I have been working on it for a little bit.
Was this a new style?
It's not necessarily that it's a new style. It's sort of an evolution of like an ongoing concept around
different inspiration
around my subconscious. But it is a bit of a metaphorical breakthrough for myself because I feel like I'm letting go of myself through this work. I'm not painting myself, which I've kind of done previously, like as in, I've kind of painted people in my work a lot before. I've let go of that, and I'm really like looking at nature and growth as this metaphor for what I'm allowing for myself. And then I've got Lucy working on her, metaphorical head sculptures, which ties this sense of identity back into this idea of like human nature. And then I'm working through this idea of like the seasons of your psychology. So I'm using nature as this metaphor of like the seasons of our psychology, and that no one season can stay, and that you have to have these kind of like darker seasons or these
the
winters of life, in parallel to these sunnier seasons, brighter seasons.
And the seasons to sow the seeds.
Seasons to sow the seeds.
Yeah.
And so it feels like a really nice, big metaphorical idea for me. And I want to show this work and this body of thinking in a space that talks to this idea. And again, I'm doing it for myself, so that's why I haven't rushed.
Beautiful.
This one, I over the years I've had shows pretty concurrently. I've let this one walk me or take me for the walk, and I'm really enjoying that because there's no pressure. And
just throwing yourself into the process, huh?
Throwing myself into the process and letting the process, kind of guide me towards that conclusion of presenting this idea. And yeah, I'm spending time with other people like yourself, which I find incredibly valuable. I'm working with other creatives. I'm spending time with other artists and creative people. And I feel like I have a network that's really, genuine.
I can attest to that, man. Like you're a very highly respected person within the community, man. So thanks. Your name has been thrown around well before we connected. So I already knew of you at the very least, and had a good understanding of what your work, or not even your work, what your sensibility was about. So, and that just came through people just coming up in conversation.
Yeah, well, I really value other people that have this level of curiosity. I have actual great admiration for people that are willing to put themselves out there for the benefit of others, and are willing to kind of challenge themselves and figure out their creativity, figure out what they want to contribute, because I liken creativity to contribution in my mind. And so much of who I am these days is a byproduct of the people I'm with.
Entirely, right.
And I really choose who those people are, and I really admire them because it takes guts.
Dude, well, on that note, man, I really appreciate you jumping on.
Yeah, man.
We've spoken so much about metaphors, but what that tells me is how interconnected and how related everything seems to be. If you can take one literal thing here and place it as a metaphor for this, it really does highlight the interconnectedness between all of our practices, all of the facets of life, and how we can apply this philosophy to that, and how you've done it through your strategic practices and your art practices, and how you relate with people, the people that you attract. So all of it, dude. No, I really appreciate it, man. Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. Likewise, I think what you do is fantastic. So I
appreciate that.
Thank you.
Man. It's only as good as the people that come on.
Oh, well, mate, thank you so much for having me.